When trying to decide the focus for today's episode, I was getting kind of stuck because I didn't know whether I should focus on the creativity of my guests or the artistry of their subject instead. But in the end, I kind of thought I can't really extract one from the other. So today is going to be a bit of a meta episode in that we're going to be exploring the creativity of my two filmmakers who've come on today. And they have made a spectacular feature film that explores the creativity and the creative journey of an artist. So it's going to be kind of a multi-layered episode of Creativity Uncovered. So thank you for being here. My name is Abi Gatling, and I invite you to join me on this journey where I am uncovering how everyday people find inspiration, get inventive, and open their imagination. And basically, I'm just exploring how people are using creative solutions at home, at work, at play, and everything in between. And my ultimate goal is that by the end of it, you'll be armed with a whole suite of tried and tested ways to summon creativity the next time that you need it. Now, before we continue, please know that the film that we will be discussing today does contain some sensitive content relating to domestic violence. And while we're definitely not going to go into that in great detail, please do look after yourself and tune out if you think this is not going to suit you. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome my filmmakers, Jason and Blue Gerber. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Hi.
I'm glad to be here.
Yes, I love it when we have international guests and tuning in from the other side of the world. And that's just kind of the joy of these podcasts, right? Is that they have these great connections between people on all corners of the world. So I'm very excited to speak to you today because I've just watched your feature film, Dawn Dusk, which I mentioned earlier, which has just been released. So congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a long time coming.
Yes. Oh gosh. And I'm so keen to get into the journey of all of that. And because there's a really beautiful piece. I want to talk about the film. I also want to talk about kind of the story of the designer who you are, highlighting in this film. But I also want to explore your creative journey with this piece because it's actually your first full-length documentary that you've crafted. So that's, there's a lot to unpack today. So I think we should start with the film. So Dawn Dusk, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Dawn Dusk is the story of Chellie Look, and we're really following a season of her life as a leather bag designer. And she has just launched a collection called Dawn Dusk. But she is also going through a season where she is grieving the loss of her sister, who she lost in a domestic violence incident. Actually, in a murder. She was murdered by her husband, unfortunately. And we are picking up with Chellie during this season where she's both launching this new collection while processing her grief and healing. And it goes through some twists and turns and kind of goes in a direction that you're not expecting. But it's really about how we as people, the intersection between our emotions as people and art, and how our emotions and grief and our healing pour out through our art, whether we like it to or not.
Yeah, it's a wonderful film, but that sort of struggle kind of plays out through the entire thing. Obviously the first part is, with her deep grief for her sister,
Yeah.
but also something that a lot of our audience struggle with is that kind of the idea of balancing a business that, a business is all about making money and, providing and profit and all that sort of thing, but also being able to maintain the integrity of your artistry during that process as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good observation. Is the film is like kind of layered in a lot of ways. And I think, and I hope that viewers can like see themselves in a lot of different ways or places. Not everybody is going through such deep grief. And I think that if you are, you can see yourself in Chelle's story there. But if you're a creative and you are trying to make a living, there's also that element, which is just so prevalent in her journey that you can also see yourself in. And I think that it was very interesting as filmmakers ourselves and creatives ourselves to sort of like you said, it's kind of meta. We were going through our own creative process, and we were watching someone go through a creative process, and that person finding their like voice and who they are. That the season of Chelle's life that we capture really is like one where she is kind of, it's a transitional season in a way. When she comes out on the other side, she's kind of found who she wants to be in for the future, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's very kind of transformational. And I
Yeah.
was thinking the whole time because you said last time we spoke that this was kind of the first documentary full length documentary that you've done. I wanted to know, like, how did that come about? Like, how did you come across Chellie, and did you know her story prior to this, or like, how did that all happen?
Yeah, we like to say we kind of accidentally made a documentary for 9 years. So I think the short story of that is that we were kind of like in each other's orbit, but not didn't really know each other. We kind of were loosely connected through friends of friends, and we got an invite to her open studio that she was having for the launch of her collection. And at the time, we were looking for a piece to put on our portfolio, kind of a docu-style high-end piece about a maker to put on our portfolio. Those kinds of pieces were very popular at the time. It was 2016, and we were starting to get asked for that kind of work, to bid on that kind of work, and so we needed to kind of have something like that on our portfolio. And so we went to this open studio. We walked in, and we were kind of taken back by Chelle's aesthetic, her work, and her personality as well. And we thought, oh, maybe we could make a video about Chellie. So we asked her, and she said, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's get coffee. And we didn't know anything about her story. And when we asked her, how did you get started with this process? What's the inspiration behind all of this? She told us the story of her sister, and she told us how she's giving back 10% of her time and her proceeds to a domestic violence shelter as well. And it was shocking and emotional and not what we expected, but I don't think we knew what to do with it in the moment, but we just decided to start filming. And then after it's a side project, so we kind of pop in and film a little bit here and pop in and film a little bit there. And eventually we probably had enough for a 5-minute piece, but we kind of kept coming back. And after a bit, we realized, you know what, I think it's time to sort of evaluate what the story is going to be and to listen to what our gut is saying, that there's more here and that there's a full-length feature film here, and maybe we should explore that.
Yes, I mean that's so different from what you kind of initially set out to do. It's probably like a
Yeah.
light-hearted piece with a focus on the artistry, or maybe a focus on the
Exactly.
products. And now all of a sudden you've come across this deep personal story that's like there has to have been a conversation between the two of you to be like, oh, is this do we do this? Do we not? How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think like you've talked about how
Yeah.
it's like not a story that we had seen told very much.
Yeah, I think we just, saw that it was a very unique story, and we saw a lot of power in it. And I think we saw that Chellie knew that there was power in sharing about her sister and sharing about just kind of the journey that she was going through and the journey that she was on. And I'm sure it was probably in some ways also healing for her to share and to open up in that way. And so, because of all of those things, we kind of saw, wow, this is really unique. This is
Hmm.
really different. It's a different kind of story than we've seen, and it's really beautiful. We saw a lot of beauty in what was happening in her life, and kind of, seeing this person coming out of this dark season of time into this place of light and hope and, really choosing light after darkness. And so, so that's what kept us coming back. And we found, as we asked her more questions, we kept uncovering like layers of the story, and felt like we needed a longer length of time to be able to tell all those different layers of the story.
And it was life-giving in its own way for us, because we're at the behest of our clients most of the time. And this was something that we were getting to make on our own time for ourselves, without a deadline, without a brief. We were able to sort of explore. And I think something we do in the movie that we get to, we can talk more about this, is that we got to also not just document, we got to sort of try to reflect the artwork that we were seeing back into the craft of filmmaking itself. So there was also intentionality behind that, and that was really fun to get to do.
Yes, I mean, because there is still that focus on that beautiful craft that she's doing, as well as the story and her moving through her grief. So, I think it's so interesting. I think it's very interesting. And I mean, there must have been something in that, in knowing that you were going to be taking on this quite a, deep or heavy focus on the documentary, quite different from the other work that you were doing. Was that something that you kind of had to come to terms with, or did it just feel right?
I think most of the time it felt right. I think there were definitely days, there were days when we would come home from, filming Chellie as an artist at work, and it was life-giving and rejuvenating. And there were days that we came home after we spent time with her talking about heavy subjects. And, as filmmakers and documentarians, you kind of need to be really empathetic. So you're really putting yourself in the shoes of your subject. And so you're really trying to almost feel the weight of what it's like to be that person. And so when Chellie's talking about some of her experience and some of her grief, there were definitely days when we had to come home and decompress. And obviously what we were experiencing is not even close to what she was experiencing. But I think that there were times where it was hard, and there have been conversations that we've had, between us about, because Chellie talks about, she had this fear of people, she, if this person that was in our family is capable of something, what am I capable of? What are you capable of? And so, not that we were sitting in that fear ourselves, but those were conversations that we had, and those heavy things to explore of what's the humanity, both the dark and the light, and how do we kind of hold space for all of this? Well, like you said, trying to go back to work on a regular day the next day and make a commercial for a client.
Yeah, more like just kind of feeling wow, those are big things to think about, and big things to have to wrestle through. And it makes the sense that she was, having to kind of wrestle through that in her mind, because just something so traumatic as an experience like that, will do that to you, will do that to a person. And I think something that's not talked about a lot in grief, and when we talk about grief, is just the psychological somersaults that your mind is doing. Just your brain doesn't do very well with severing attachment. Your brain wants to create connection, create attachments. And so when all of a sudden there is something that you thought was one way completely flips and is completely detached, it's very difficult psychologically. So I think we, on a psychological level, that's what we were witnessing her kind of wrestle through and her process
Yeah.
through. And then, obviously emotionally, there was a lot coming out as well. But I think what was so amazing about it all is how it was reflected in her work so beautifully. And, yeah, we can like probably dive into that more, but just how, the inspiration behind Dawn Dusk, how it was pouring into her work.
Yes, I suppose like, she's capturing that and translating it into her pieces and her collection, but you're trying to also do that as well. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
found like these parallels between
Hmm.
it the whole time was just so interesting. And like you mentioned the fear before, and that really struck me as well because, quite often you think, the scariest things are those, the strangers that you don't know and the people, the people peeking out from hiding
Yeah.
bushes or whatever. But and it's so I can imagine it would just be so rocking to your core when it's someone who is
Yeah.
in your family, one of your closest circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, we spent a lot of time with it and it's still hard to imagine.
Yeah.
Mm. Mm. So that, I mean, what did your creative process look like for that? It was supposed to be starting off at a 5 minute short, and you realize that this story deserves to be bigger than that. Um, what does the creative process look like when you're changing the scope so much?
I think at first it was, well, let's follow this thread. Let's follow
Yeah.
what we're seeing. Let's leave more space for telling this story and kind of let it go however long it needs to go. And so we kind of began with that observation, which I think when you are in a creative process, I feel like it never goes how you imagine it's going to go in your head before you begin it. But I think that's part of being an artist, is noticing the twists and turns and noticing where, the journey is starting to take you and leaning into that rather than, trying to resist it. So I think for this project, it was us leaning into, oh, like this needs to be longer. And so we like leaned into that more. And then I think as we continued to just observe and to listen and left space for Chellie to talk, we had like 3 hour long interviews with her. So they were just like these long times of her just getting to process on camera and us just listening and making observations about what she was saying and then allowing her to respond to those things. And then as we, got deeper into it with her and, we kind of, in the beginning, we're talking about a lot of broad subjects. And then over time, as we grew more comfortable together and as we observed more about the story and started to kind of hone in more on, what we were seeing that was interesting, we started to get into more vulnerable subjects. And then those vulnerable subjects kind of turned into more, I guess you could call it like thoughtful observations or almost therapeutic observations about, her motivations and things that we were seeing that she maybe necessarily didn't have words for herself. And kind of one big example of that is that she created this collection called Dawn Dusk. And we asked her why did you call your collection Dawn Dusk? And then she talked about how she's very inspired by sunrise and sunset. But then as we kept talking about that, then it kind of became like, well, why are you inspired by sunrise and sunset? Well, when the murder happened and there was a 3-year waiting period after the murder for when the trial took place, and it was like kind of this really long dark period of waiting time for her. And she said that during that time when everything around her felt like very unstable and very, like I was saying before, you just had this huge change happen in your life where you thought that this person was one way and then suddenly they were another way. And then let alone having, someone that you love all of a sudden be gone. That's like another huge shift in your life. So she said, when everything felt so unstable, everything felt so inconsistent, that she was looking for things that felt faithful, and sunrise and sunset were a faithful thing to her. They are something that happens every single day without fail. And so she began this practice of going and observing the sunrise and the sunset. And so then
it took time to get there.
Yeah, it took time to get there.
In our time with Chellie, we didn't really have that conversation. There's a scene about 40 minutes of the movie when we have that conversation with her walking on the lake at sunrise. And we didn't have that conversation till like a year and a half into our time with her. So I think that's kind of an interesting observation about the creative process that we were in, which was really like patience and like having a listening ear. And also there was just in general, there was a little bit of like figuring out like, okay, what's next? What's next? Because we had never done a feature film, the craft of filmmaking is more or less the same. But we had to kind of figure out what was next.
Yeah. So we just continued to, lean into where we saw the story going, and what we saw that was interesting to us, and where we saw that there was beauty. We just continued to like press into that. And, that's how we kind of found that kind of major theme, or that major part of the movie of talking about, sunrise and sunset being this faithful thing, and that dawn and dusk in the movie is more than just about sunrise and sunset. It's about grief and healing and hope.
Yeah. It's such a fine balance, I can imagine, because, as you said, you had a year of listening. You can't be prompting or pushing the agenda too much, because it needs to, it's a real person on the other end who is working their way through this grief. Maybe it's not the right time to talk about it at that point, and you got to be ready for the subject to be able to reveal themselves.
Yeah.
Did that ever shake your confidence in this process, thinking like, oh gosh, this is not going how I thought it was going to go?
When we go to Florence, we spent really the last week-ish of her time, of her 3 months there with her. And I think that she'd settled into this little bubble and this little world that was apart from the rest of her world. And when we showed up, I feel like it was a little bit of culture shock for her, of like her old life was in her new space. And there was an openness that we had come to expect after being with her for so long. And that openness wasn't there for a little while. And we kind of had to go and debrief and go like, okay, like, I think we had planned to film, and we said like, let's take the night off, like take some space. And I think that she had to do some of her own processing, and we kind of talked to her and just said like, we're just here to observe, and just kind of try to remind her of sort of the trust that we had built. The documentary like this is kind of built on consent between the subject and the filmmaker, and we had to kind of remind her of that. And there's a morning when it's a kind of a critical scene. There's a sunrise that we go and witness together in Florence, and it's like one of the top 5 most beautiful sunrises any of us have ever seen. And Chellie had said that it had been cloudy every morning for like weeks, and so we weren't even sure if we were going to get a sunrise. So like from a practical filmmaking perspective, we were also like, oh no, we kind of need her to go and see a sunrise, because like we want to talk a little bit about this, and it would be best visually to talk about this while there's a sunrise happening. And also, oh no, like, is she going to be open to us? And I think that morning that we had a kind of a quiet walk up the hill, and And then when the sun started to come up, it was like some life returned, and we were breathing a sigh of relief because there was suddenly that openness had returned, and we were all experiencing something very beautiful and magical and just kind of divine. And I think that that kind of broke down some barriers that maybe had been inadvertently put up due to some separation, and also some of the things that Chellie was going through herself that you actually see in the movie. It's interesting, I think, that some of our experiences as the filmmakers are things that the viewer is also experiencing when they're watching the movie, because that's just how it was. So if something felt abrupt, like her transition to decide to go to Florence, it was abrupt for us too. And so I think that those were moments of feeling like in doubt about, like, are we going to get what we need? Because, you know, at this point, we're a few years in and we kind of have an idea of like what the story, not that we're forcing our will on the story, but we have an idea of like some visuals that would be helpful and some things to talk about that would be helpful. And so those, you know, you get a little concerned when those things are happening like that. So that's one story, I think, very practically, of like, okay, are we going to get this?
And I would say overall, it definitely was a learning process for us as filmmakers, because we mostly come from a narrative background where, you know, you have a script and you have actors and you have control over the story. And so there were moments where, you know, I think in your head you're like, could you just say this? Or like, could you just like phrase it like this? But that's not how documentary works. You know, you have to follow rather than force. So so we learned a lot.
I can imagine you know, doing a scripted movie or scripted, you know, short film or anything. Like, it's kind of quite a linear process in that you know what to expect as the next step. There's this one that kind of goes out the window.
Truly, you have a script, so even in the edit, you can just, you know, you have to fine tune your edit, but you have a building block to be like, the scene goes here and the scene goes here. With our film, the first hour of the movie, you kind of mentioned it being non-linear. The first hour of our movie is incredibly non-linear. It's told in a thematic way rather than a chronological way, and so we had sort of unlimited options in the edit to sort of place whatever felt like the most impactful thematic concept in wherever we wanted. So there's almost choice paralysis there, like, where do we start? And that's, you don't have the script to sort of give you a guide. You have a totally blank slate. And that we have to give credit to our editor, Meredith, who did a fantastic job, Meredith Mantic. She helped us craft this story in the edit for a couple years. And you know, we tried the chronological edit, and, you know, we ended up with the non-linear sort of thematic element, and it works because it reflects, you know, the grief journey that we're seeing on screen too, because grief is not a linear thing. So I think that we are always trying to reflect what Chellie's story and what she was experiencing back in the filmmaking, and that's one of the ways that we're doing it. It's just that first hour is very much told in the way kind of that we might experience grief, which is sort of topsy-turvy and not a straight line.
Yes. So you're a husband and wife duo, and you've got Meredith as well who's helping you. How do you manage making those creative decisions? Are there ever differences of opinion in terms of like how you think it should progress? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think there are times, and there were times where, you know, we maybe see things differently, and there were some things in the edit where Meredith saw things differently than we did, and we had conversations about that. But I think it's I
remember when she was like, when we decided, she really wanted to get rid of like one line of dialogue, and we hadn't felt comfortable getting rid of it. And when we finally said, yeah, you're right, she like was like, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Small wins.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know, filmmaking is so collaborative. So there is this kind of I don't know how to describe it. There's this kind of like like acquiescing to each other, but you also are, it's not, it's not like compromise, but it's collaboration. You know, you are together finding a solution
Yeah.
that you're all comfortable with, and everyone has something that they bring to the table, and so like everyone gets to, you know, offer something, and everyone's valuable in that collaboration. So yeah, I mean, there definitely were times where, you know, we had different ideas, and sometimes it was like, no, we should do it like this, and it's like, oh yeah, you're right, we definitely should.
Yeah.
Or
Giving
yeah.
people space to drive. So sometimes it was like, oh, let me drive, try this way. And
Yeah.
then, oh, that doesn't work. And someone else was like, oh, let me drive. That helps me. Let me try this. And so that's like very much was a lot of exploring together. And
Yeah.
like sometimes we just all had three ideas and we had to try all three ways. And then we had to choose who we thought was the best. So that, you know, there's lots of different ways.
Or sometimes it was like, you know, oh, do it this way, and then it's like, no, you know, and
Yeah.
then you talk about it, you
Yeah.
talk about why, and then you know, you eventually work it out, like that story that Jason said about how he ended up giving up that one line of dialogue that that Meredith was really pushing for. And so, you know, I think sometimes it's like you're all seeing things in your head a specific way, and sometimes it takes a second to get on the same page
Yeah.
as collaborators.
Yeah, I guess that's I suppose why it's so important to have like a creative vision and like this outcome that you're sort of working towards.
Yeah.
And, you know, no matter the journey, as long as you get there in the end, that maybe it's worth it.
Yeah. I think, like you said, if you know where you're going to some extent, that's when you're working with a team and you have like a collective goal, that's kind of the thing that you kind of can keep referring back to. And there were some like core things that we've already ideas and core ideas that we've talked about throughout this conversation that were like anchors in our creative process.
Yeah, I think it's like you kind of view it in a tiered way, where there's like the top, you know, has to have like, has to be true to the story. There's certain things that, you know, you just know that is the core of this story. And I think it's like you probably aren't going to be working as collaborators together if you're not already aligned on
Yeah.
those core elements, you know. And then from there, I think there's like then different tiers of, you know, then refining what everything else is around those core elements. And, you know, even today in the film, there's still little moments or little things where, you know, it was maybe not exactly how we would have liked it to be or imagined it to be, but it needed to be for one way or the other, or it just was because it's a documentary.
Yeah.
And
You only get so much
you
control.
only get so much control. So yeah, but really, like, those things don't really matter. They don't take away from, you know, the core of what the story is.
Yes. And I mean, this sounds like such a long process. You said 6 years, was it, in developing it? Uh, In such a long process, how did you sustain your creativity and your enthusiasm, and also, Shelley's enthusiasm? You said that, you know, there's some part where she withdrew from you, but like that, how do you both sustain your creativity to ensure that you want to continue with this project?
Well, the actual filming process was about 3 years. So, I mean, that's still a long time to ask of a person, you know, to allow us to invade their life, you know, invade Shelley's life. So, you know, that's still a lot of time, but she was on a journey. So there's definitely, you know, a kind of an arc that we follow in the film, and that we followed over those 3 years, where she was on a journey in her business and on a journey emotionally, and those things, were intersecting. And so I think with that in mind, there was always new things happening. And she was just wonderful at always letting us know what was going on so that we could be there to film it. And I think that was because she, again, saw the power in the story that she had to tell, but she also, I think she appreciated us as artists. And it was like from an artist to another artist, you just see each other in that, and can appreciate each other in the creative process. And so she really was like a wonderful subject to work with, because in many ways she was championing us as artists along the way.
Yeah.
Which was really sweet of her, and she continues to champion us as well, even in the release. And then
3.5 years of editing.
Yeah, and then 3.5 years of editing. And I think at that point, there was like this period of time where we had wrapped filming at the end, or like kind of mid 2019, and we were trying to edit the film, and we had over 80 hours of footage that we were trying to sort through and work through. But when you're so close to a project and you've been making it for so long, it was really hard to even know where to begin. And so we realized we really need to bring in an editor for this. We really need a collaborator. And so then the pandemic happened, and that was like a whole thing that kind of slowed things down as well. But then once we kind of settled into pandemic life, into lockdown life, we were able to return to pursuing, an editor. And we actually found Meredith during the pandemic and started working with her remotely, and just bringing in someone else into the project who was passionate about it and who saw what we were seeing in the story,
and who does this every day. She's an editor, by trade, where we are not.
Yeah. She brought a lot of life to us, and she brought a lot of life back into the project. And then I think that continued then when we entered into recording the score for the film, and we worked with our composer Silas Height. And that was a really fun process where we had many days of getting to go into his studio, and he would show us, the kind of the temp tracks that he had recorded before we actually brought in
the real
instrumentalists to record it. And so that brought a lot of life to the project. Just, being just the two of us for so long, it sometimes felt a little isolating, or a little, questioning, like, is this a good project or not? But then actually bringing in collaborators who saw the vision, that brought a lot of life to keep us to the finish line.
Yeah. Was there ever a point where you're like, oh gosh, we shouldn't have stopped filming? Like, how do you know when do you stop? How do you know when to stop filming a documentary?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about spoilers?
I don't know.
Sure. I think we can talk. It's not that big of a spoiler. The journey, it's about getting to the journey, and not as much about the actual moment. But in the film, if the listeners haven't seen it, Chellie chooses to close her business, and because she felt like it was no longer serving who she was. And it's a really brave choice. And I think that, I really am still impressed by that decision. But we had stopped filming for a while, and like Blue was saying, we had been trying to find, this story and put it together in the edit. And we didn't really have an ending. We weren't sure what we were going to end this film, because there wasn't a natural conclusion at that point. And so we were like, well, how do we kind of wrap this up? And we hadn't really been filming very much, and we weren't sure if we needed to go back and get pickups or not. But we were like, let's just work on the edit and see what we have and what we don't have. And then she calls us one day and says, "Hey, I'm closing my business." And at first we were like, "Oh no, like how does this affect everything? Does this change everything? Does this like null our film in some way?" And then after a moment of thinking and processing, we were like, "Oh wait, this is a very natural conclusion to this chapter of your life." And as unexpected as it was, it also makes a lot of sense. And so we picked the cameras back up and we spent time with her as she closed out that season of her life. And then we knew that we had a complete start to finish chapter of this season of one person's life. And then we knew we were finished. There were a few things that I picked up. I shot some sunsets and sunrises much later on. But that was really all the only other things I filmed. The real principal filming of the film was done after she closed her business. And we were able to look back at that and go, okay, we started with her as she just launched this collection, and we ended with her as she closes her shop. And in the process, we watched someone go through a transformation. And this is like a logical and satisfying place to finish. Chellee's story goes on, but this part of her life, this distinct chapter, is on camera and it's done, and there was no need to film anymore. We're always asking the question as filmmakers of like, why this story now? That's always a good question when you sit down and you write anything. If you're writing a script, like the character that you were writing has had a whole life, so why the story of that character in that moment? And not that we were writing Chellee's story, but we just happened to be there at the right time. And applying that same logic, it just made sense that the story that we were telling had concluded.
Yeah, I suppose that is like a great way to kind of punctuate the end of that season, as you
Yeah.
said. So interesting. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I feel like I have so many more questions to ask you, but we've run out of time. So I want to thank you so much, Blue and Jason, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having
Yeah,
us.
thank you. This was lovely.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you. If anyone who's tuned in love this episode, we will be popping the links so you can go ahead and watch Dawn Dusk. It's actually now streaming, in Australia, streaming in Amazon. Um,
And
and
Hoopla, if you're a library user. And
oh,
then it's also going to be, there's a couple platforms that you can log on they have worldwide access as well. One's called Fossum, that's coming, and then another one called Ganjing World. And those links are all on our website.
oh, wonderful. Excellent. So I'll pop all the links to the website and everything in our show notes. So please do check it out. It's a beautifully shot film, beautifully crafted story. And I loved delving a bit more into it today. So yeah, thank you for tuning into Creativity Uncovered. And until next time, take care. If you've made it this far, a huge thank you for your support and tuning into today's episode. Creativity Uncovered has been lovingly recorded on the land of the 𝐂𝐫𝐞𝐞 people, and we pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. This podcast has been produced by my amazing team here at Crisp Communications, and the music you just heard was composed by James Gatling. If you liked this episode, please do share it around and help us on our mission to unlock more creativity in this world. You can also hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episode releases.